James Grundvig is the author of Master Manipulator, and let me read the subtitle. The explosive true story of fraud, embezzlement, and government betrayal at the CDC. And you are going to be amazed at the story he has to tell. He is the father of a vaccine-injured child. Is
Yes.
your child autistic?
That's correct. He's one of the 5,400 cases kicked out of vaccine court. But I'll get into that in a second. What I'd like to talk about first is actually, I'm going to use this poster as a graph. I'll put the book down. Very simply, this is increased ratio. Here's timeline. Timeline is 1930 to 2019. So imagine this. If you took the autism rate in 1930 was 0. By 1940 it was 1 in 10,000. 1960 1 in 10,000. So you look at the residential U.S. population growth over time. We now have 335 million people, give or take, right? 330 million. By the mid-80s, when they started adding more and more vaccines, the autism rate started to climb from 1 in 10,000, 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 2,500. By 1986 and 7, when they gave the National Childhood Immunization Protection Program, the Act, the only thing that immunized was pharma. It did not protect any of the children at all. That created vaccine court. So what's interesting here at this point, this is the gateway year, 1989, a couple years later, when pharma was licensed to make any vaccine any way they want. They could put motor oil in it, they could put plutonium in it. They are 100% protected by law from liability. What's stunning is when you see autism rates, it exploded from 1 in 2,500 all the way up to where it is today to 1 in 36. 1 in 36. That is amazing. The number of vaccines went from maybe 5 or 6 with a few boosters on the schedule in the mid-80s, and that has exploded to 75. So that's exploded many, many times. The U.S. residential population basically doubled over the same amount of time. That was it. So this has gone up many percent. This has gone up 30,000+% over here. What's even more stunning now is, if you look at this, we are now at 1 in 36. By 2030, I did some math. By 2030, it'll be 1 in 4. Well, what does 1 in 4 mean? Well, today we have about 80,000 kids every year are being diagnosed on the spectrum. So 1 in 4 then will be, you'll have 1 million children born. That's out of 4 million kids in 2030 will be born on the autism spectrum. That will include everything else that's been discussed here today. The food allergies, the autoimmune disease, all the other issues that go with vaccines. Vaccines are poisonous. We've been lied to for a long time by pharma. So my next point is the book, Master Manipulator. Master Manipulator is a $25 million cover story. It is the biggest fraud and lie there is. In fact, two of the main, it should be manipulators with plural. CDC hired a Danish scientist, Paul Thorsen, to cook data based on a historical database they had in Denmark. So they manipulated data to show no association between vaccines and autism. Even though the CDC and all the people there in pharma knows that vaccines does cause autism, by the way. What's more stunning is in the mid-80s, 2 of the lead people, Colleen Boyle, she is now the director of the National Child Birth Defects Developmental Disabilities, or the NCB-DDD, a wing of the a new division created by Bill Clinton in 2000 with the CDC. Also, Frank Stefano, he was also the principal investigator of Agent Orange studies in the 1980s. Our U.S. government, the CDC, was put in charge of trying to find out the correlation between dioxin sprayed in Vietnam and young men coming back from the Vietnam War who survived the wars and survived the shooting, survived the entire battles there, but yet come home and end up with cancer at a very young age, rare cancers. 38 different kinds of acute rare cancers, among many other diseases that are just not normal. And somehow the CDC, well, we don't know Operation Ranchan, with the spraying happened, and troop movements. Actually, they did. They had all this information stored up in Harrisburg at a warehouse with the U.S. Army. Congress wanted them to go get it, but the CDC instead got up and walked out the door. So they were supposed to conduct 4 studies. They left this study 2 years early, 1987. and they left 21 million out of $71 million, which is a lot of money back in the 80s. They left that on the table. What government agency ever leaves millions of dollars on the table not to conclude a study they're tasked out to do? These same people, Frank Stefano, who's now in charge of vaccine safety for the last 20 years at CDC, and Colleen Boyle, they are two highly in charge. In any other part of the world, in any industry, these two people have been fired for their incompetence, for their corruption, for the lying, for everything they've done to harm and hurt. So they've hurt Vietnam vets, now they've hurt lots and lots of millions of children. There's at least 2 million children on the spectrum. So what does this say as far as going back to this graph here? What does that really tell us, the 1 in 4, the 1 million kids? Well, if you do the math on it, and if you figure out these children have $14,000 or $15,000 a year in medical care, adult care, so on and so forth, it's a very conservative number. If you run the numbers out, the U.S. government, people, society will be spending something on a magnitude of $80 trillion by 2030. $80 trillion, give or take. So if you think the country is bankrupt now, we think we're in debt now with 22 million, think again, we're going to be absolutely bankrupt, and it's a massive wealth transfer from society, from us, from these children who are injured or grown adults who will never be able to reproduce. They are definitely not going to be the next Steve Jobs. They're not going to be the next Tim Cook. They're not going to be the next developers, artists, and so on. They'll never work. Thus, they'll be a burden on society all the way through. Back to Master Manipulator. At the end of the day, this $25 million cover story cooked data on the mercury in vaccines and cooked data on the MMR, claiming no association. Same exact template they used in Agent Orange are used again in the early 2000s. What do they do with these studies? They use these studies in vaccine court. They wouldn't allow a rebuttal, and they claim vaccines are safe and do not cause autism. So the 5,400 cases, my son being one of them, were all summarily kicked out of vaccine court in 2011 for no association. So the lie continues. So they have the very narrow window in vaccine court. They will not pay for the injured. They continuously create new weeds that are being burdened to society. And in fact, in my opinion, pharma is not only injuring these children, but this is a big depopulation program. And if you don't think so, you should do some research on it, because what is the purpose of injuring all these children? It serves no purpose to America of tomorrow. Thank you.